Welcome to the Boxing Source Podcast, where we go over the latest news in boxing and react to all of the fights that happened in the past week. Now, let's go to our host, J.R. Bell. Yo, what's going on? What's happening, everybody? What's good? We checking in here. That's right, it's November 9th, 2025. The latest edition of the Boxing Source Podcast. That's right, J.R. Bell here in the building, man. Just trying to catch up with everything that's been happening within the sport of boxing and everything like that. We had a fairly eventful weekend for some, to say the least. We wanted to get, reactions from folks out here, to see what's going on, to see what's going down, and give folks reactions to what happened over the weekend. Yes, there was some good action there when it came to some of the fights that were on slate there this weekend. But we of course had the big event there that was in Texas yesterday. So we're going to be getting right into that here first on the docket. There actually had the WBC interim super welterweight title on the line with Vergil Ortiz Jr. going up against Erickson Lubin. At the time, you had Vergil Ortiz defending that interim super welterweight title. Of course, he's had his win over Sergey Boychuk last year, right? It was going in there with that record of 23-0 with 21 wins by way of knockout, with Erickson Lubin there with the record of 27-2 with 19 of those wins by way of knockout. Of course, Lubin had been a world title challenger in the past, had been, competing around the top of the super welterweight division, actually had an attempt to win the interim WBC super welterweight title a few years back, but, failed to do so in his bout against Sebastian Fundora, right? But then he had 3 consecutive wins against Luis Arias, Jesus Ramos Jr., and the latest one against Arjo Holmes Jr. Before having his fight against Vergil Ortiz Jr. We know about Vergil Ortiz Jr. and his bouts that he's had against Sergey Boychuk, against Israel Madrimov, against Thomas Delorme, and against, Frederick Lawson, while being at or around the 154-pound division, right? So now, he is getting to the point where he's a little bit closer to being a world champion, or as they say, trying to be a world champion or whatnot, right? So they wanted to see what he could do in this particular bout against Erickson Lubin. This one was at the Diggy's Arena in Fort Worth, Texas. Okay, not that far, from where Vergil Ortiz originates, right? As he is, from Grand Prairie, Texas. Okay. There was a lot of build up behind it, seeing what, Vergil Ortiz Jr. could do against a fighter like Erickson Lubin, who, as I said, had those wins against Jesus Ramos Jr. in particular a couple of years ago, and then a fight against Arjo Holmes Jr., right? But, hey, I mean, some people saw what happened there on that front. You know what I'm saying? They did, see what happened on that front. And it didn't really take long there, man. And just real quick, shout out to those that's participating in the live chat. We appreciate the communication here, while we go live on the podcast, right? Shout out to my guy, Mar the Prince, in the building, checking in fairly early. Talks about, one of the fighters that was on the undercard there for Vergil Ortiz Jr. versus Erickson Lubin in Amari Jones. We did perform, really well there on that front, man. Getting that quick win against Shady Gamora. What a name, Shady. Your first name, Shady. Not even a nickname, but that's your first name right there. But yeah, he's done fairly well there. Now 15-0, and him against Jahai Tucker. That would be an interesting bout, especially with Jahai Tucker. Getting a win over Truck Simpson over in New Jersey, a few months ago. So that would kind of like be a good little mix up there on that front, right? But now, we wanted to get into, this bout here with the main event, as was mentioned there with Vergil Ortiz Jr. Erickson Lubin, right? And yeah, a lot of people know there, of course, didn't really take that long, for Vergil Ortiz Jr. to get the win. Vergil Ortiz, did what, I guess some people were expecting him to do, as he was like what as high as like an 8.5 to 1 favorite against Erickson Lubin. Now, in the first round, I thought, I would see a couple of things from Erickson Lubin that would, have him utilize everything that he had in his advantage. Him going into this particular bout as the southpaw against the orthodox fighter, him being the taller fighter, him having the longer reach there at 74, while you have Vergil Ortiz would have reached a 70. But the thing is sometimes when you have like a fighter that kind of like, how would I say it? Almost looks like he goes through the motions at times, as in textbook. Jab, 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 part of jab. Not throw the jab with emphasis. For those that's watching, like throw the jab with emphasis. As he's a southpaw, he throws the right jab. So you gotta be able to snap the jab sometimes. Snap the jab, mix it up, and everything like that. But not necessarily like paw the jab or whatever it is, because sometimes you've seen that. You've seen him paw the jab. Maybe to kind of like gauge how his reach would be against Vergil Ortiz Jr. But Vergil Ortiz, he was moving his head around and kind of like trying to get within range in order for him to do work. So he was, Vergil Ortiz was doing that while, they were pretty much around the center of the ring. But you seen very early that Erickson Lubin was backing up to the ropes. And when you do that, you kind of give up a lot of things that you could do against your opponent, because especially as sometimes you might, if you get to the corner, you might not have no escape routes, and sometimes you kind of like give your opponent the opportunity to block an escape route that you might have. And you seen that early there in this fight, as Vergil Ortiz was able to throw and land a left hook to actually give that escape route that Erickson Lubin could have had by moving over to his right, Vergil Ortiz's left, and that kind of like cut things in half on that front. You know what I mean? So you did see that kind of like early in the bout. And then the other thing is, you've seen Erickson Lubin with the high guard very early. And they're like, I've said this in reference to some other fighters in the past. I don't necessarily like when you have like a high guard, especially if you're stationary with that high guard, and if you're kind of like wide with your elbows while you have that high guard. Because as you see, if you're watching here, you can see you have all of these entry points for your opponent: straights, uppercuts, hooks around the guard, all that type of stuff, right? So you kind of like seeing that in the instance there within the first round. And by the time you got to the end of the first round or whatever it was, right? You saw Vergil Ortiz Jr. go to the corner. You had his head trainer there, Robert Garcia. You'll pretty much like say, hey, you know what? Just be patient. Just see what's going on. Be patient. Take your time. All that type of stuff, and things will kind of like open up from there. And then after that, you see what happened in round two. Same thing with Erickson Lubin. Pawing the jab, not really throwing it with emphasis. You got to, at least try to mix it up, or get to a point where, okay, get your opponent to react if you're going to throw the jab, but you want to throw the jab with emphasis, because you don't want to leave it, just flickering and out there, because if he responds, he's going to respond with some emphasis. And that's what you've seen with Vergil Ortiz Jr. there in pretty much within that short period of time, right? And then going back to the ropes again. You know what I'm saying? Going back to the ropes. So, and that was pretty much the downfall. Shout out to brother Timothy Taylor, in the building here, chiming in, has a question, which I will get to here in a moment. All right. So great question. I'm going to get back to that here, while I go through whatever's left of this explanation of the fight. Because as you said, it wasn't really that much at all, right? Okay. Erickson Lubin, back to the ropes once again. Erickson Lubin, there with high guard once again. And if you, as a fighter, see an opponent with a high guard, there's a couple of things that you do if you have the experience, if you have the smarts, as they say, to go against it. If Vergil Ortiz did that, what did he do? Erickson Lubin, high guard, Okay, Erickson Lubin with his his strong hand, the left hand, high up. You have Vergil Ortiz kind of like cut down that left hand and shoot around with the right. Okay, shoot around with the right, had Erickson Lubin kind of like temporarily stunned, and then you've seen, Vergil Ortiz kind of like step over to his right, Erickson Lubin's left a little bit, and just continue to, land the rights or land the right hand that was pretty much like around the side or the back, almost to the back of the head, but to the side where, you could kind of mess up your opponent's equilibrium. And once that happened, that was immediately it, from the referee that was there, going over this particular fight. He stopped it right off the rip because he felt like Erickson Lubin was out on his feet on that front. All right, so not that long at all. It's just in the second round TKO and all that type of stuff, right? You know what I mean? And so now you got Vergil Ortiz Jr. They're now 24-0, okay, with 22 of his wins by way of knockout. Of course, his previous two fights were the only fights that he didn't win by stoppage, okay, against Sergey Boychuk and Israel Madrimov, right? So now he's able to defend that WBC interim super welterweight title. Shout out to Brother Barter Prince here, chiming in. He says, good performance by Vergil Ortiz. Didn't expect for it to end that early, but Lubin is an ace fighter. He's been in many wars. He had the Charlo fight, he had the Fundora fight, Jesus Ramos fight, Jason Rosario, and his punch resistance is gone. Okay, yep. Now, with that being said, right, let's do this when it comes to Erickson Lubin. As mentioned, he did have his fight against Jermell Charlo. That was back in 2017, where he had that opportunity to become the WBC Super Welterweight title at the time. They brought him up there really quick against Jermell Charlo, who already had 29 fights under his belt before that particular fight. First round, near the end of the first round, gets caught. It's a wrap. It's over. You know what I mean? Then he has like a string of wins, including the win over Terrell Gausha, including the win, as mentioned there, against Jason Rosario. Was a knockout victory there in Atlanta. That was in 2021. Then he has that bout against Sebastian Fundora, as I mentioned. We talked about that fight. Leading into that fight, I felt like that was like fight of the year material. And that pretty much like, hey, we got a fight of the year basically off of that particular matchup between Erickson Lubin and Sebastian Fundora. He ended up having a stoppage loss on that front, right? Okay. Next up, he gets in there against Luis Arias. Then he has a fight against Jesus Ramos Jr. And a lot of people felt like Jesus Ramos highly favored. See if he could get that win and then kind of like move up there within the 154-pound division. A lot of people were surprised that Erickson Lubin was able to get the win there in Las Vegas in September of 2023. So that put him in the mix. But I feel like this is one or two key things here with Erickson Lubin at that particular time, right? One, since I felt like since a number of people didn't really feel like he was going to win against Jesus Ramos, that they were kind of like writing him off at the time. Okay. He gets the win. One would think that would put him, in the mix at 154 around that time. But he didn't get a fight until May of this year. There was some talk about him potentially fighting Tim Tszyu. That didn't happen. Maybe they would try to, get him in the mix against Jesus Ramos Jr. again. I don't know if that was something that they worked on after this fight, but that didn't necessarily happen. So you had Erickson Lubin pretty much on the shelf for some time until he was able to get the fight against Argel Holmes Jr. Okay. And at that point, that put him like right in the mix for competing for the IBF super welterweight title, right? Because that was like a final eliminator. But even with that, after getting that win, couldn't really negotiate or agree to terms there with the IBF champion there in Bakram Murtazaliev. And then this opportunity comes up here with Vergil Ortiz Jr. Okay. And well, he gets the opportunity. Probably got more money off of that deal and things like that. But we saw what ended up happening there on that front. So that's number one. Number two, from the Jesus Ramos Jr. bout to this bout against Vergil Ortiz Jr., Erickson Lubin has had 3 fights with 3 different head trainers. This was mentioned on the telecast while the fight was happening, right? At one point he had Kevin Cunningham, has had it there for a good little bit, you know what I'm saying? And then after that, you had the fight with Arjo Holmes Jr. That was in Florida, outside of Lakeland or whatever it was, right? Had another trainer there. In this particular fight, he had K Karoma as the trainer. You know what I mean? And there's been some talk about K Karoma as a trainer in the pro game. Okay. I've had criticisms of him. Some people around the boxing sphere have had criticism of him at some time. You know what I mean? And well, even going into this bout, man. I mean, at the time, this was one that I kind of like guessed incorrectly. I was saying, of course, leading into this fight, like, don't sleep on Erickson Lubin, don't sleep on Erickson Lubin, don't sleep on him. You know what I mean? And then what it was about a week or a week and a half or something there, and it says that he's there with K Karoma. And once I heard that, I'm like, oh my goodness, you know what I'm saying? Now like my confidence kind of like went down a little bit, you know what I mean? So with that being said, I have to say like, what's going on? I don't know if there was like something going on within his camp or whatever it is. Yes, he's had interviews about what he's been doing as far as like preparing for the fight. But here, I'm like, I don't know, man. It just looked like he was really kind of like out of it as far as like his overall energy level of sorts, right? So I'd have to see like how that is. Let me see here because I wanted to see if I could get some guests on here for this particular show, man. But I'm gonna try to see how that could work. Um, let's see here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna see if I could get that link going and see if they're able to join in. If not, then this is gonna be towards one particular apparatus, and I'm gonna have them say, "Hey, y'all gotta get this thing. Y'all gotta get this thing fixed up." You know what I'm saying? Shout out to my guy Tip Bayless in the building. You know what I'm saying? That and he says that Lubin dropped the ball. Well, yeah, I mean, in a sense, he did. You know what I mean? But having camps with multiple trainers, back to back to back, you don't have a level of consistency or being used to the trainer that you have, there on that front. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to go with what you have from previous experience, and then see if you can learn new things to try to come up with new things here. As they say, you know what I mean? And I guess it didn't necessarily work out there with K Karoma in the corner there for Erickson Lubin. That could be on one front. Okay. One other thing though, and this is like something to kind of like have it as an idea of sorts, right? Um, Given the status of Erickson Lubin and what he could have, that could affect who he has in his corner. You know what I mean? So that's also another thing to kind of like consider is like if you have like something what like I would say resources or like thereof, that could really affect who your trainer is and how much that they could be there with you in preparation for this particular fight. So I have to see how that works. You know what I mean? Um, what else? So that's also something to consider there with Erickson Lubin. All right. Hold up, real quick. My guy Martha Prince here asked, like, what did you make of Tiger Johnson's performance and potential bout for him here later on down the line. I'm gonna get to that when I go over the ProBox card there. So what we got, so to speak, is Erickson Lubin really didn't have much of an effort there in this particular fight. I like to see what goes on, or what the reaction is going to be from Erickson Lubin, or his what happened with his camp and all that type of stuff. Like I heard from some people that's based in Florida that was fairly confident that Erickson Lubin would be able to get the win. And as I mentioned too, I had Erickson Lubin. I picked Erickson Lubin to be able to get the upset here, but didn't happen. Didn't happen. All right, so it's really going to be interesting to see what happens here with Erickson Lubin, because with that being the result, you could kind of say that might be it for Erickson Lubin as far as like being a contender there within 154-pound division. You know what I mean? So that's on that front. The other side here with Vergil Ortiz Jr. All right. He was able to get this win, get a second round knockout victory. No more people expected that, and they got, what they expected. And now it's like, what could be out there for Vergil Ortiz Jr.? Okay. And we all saw what happened after the fight. Vergil Ortiz had his comments and things like that. And then you did see Jerome Boots Ennis step in the ring. Now I find it interesting because I think there was someone that was in the boxing news sphere that said that maybe he would make it. But I think that came from a story that was posted from Boots Ennis saying that, he might not make it. And then all of a sudden, boom, there he is. There at the Dearest Arena there in Fort Worth, Texas. You know what I'm saying? And shout out my guy Smitty in the building. Shout out my guy Smitty in the building. All right. So I'm gonna go into this thing here, man, because you did have a whole bunch of back and forth talking and whatever it was, right? And this goes to what Timothy Taylor was asking earlier in this podcast here. He asked, "Who's telling the truth on the Boots versus Vergil Ortiz negotiations? Eddie Hearn, Oscar, Vergil Ortiz's father, or Robert Garcia?" Okay. Now what I got is this, right? Okay. I'm gonna do this, because sometimes me being a media person, news reporter, all that type of stuff. I try to get things as far as like how the timeline goes, because I'm like a historian by nature. Like I'm a history buff as far as like that's why I like took courses in college in Florida and all that type of stuff. So I try to get whatever happened and try to do it in chronological order. Okay. Now, I've said this like way back, even last year. All right. Let's go back to Vergil Ortiz Jr. having his win over Surrey Boachuk in August of last year, right? So you had that, and then from that point, Jerome Boots Ennis was still in the 147-pound division. At the time, he was supposed to have the fight with Cody Crowley, defending the IBF welterweight title. Of course, Cody Crowley was out, scratched out, so they had a replacement there, right? So Boots has his fight there in Philadelphia in July, or whatever it was, or yeah, that was back in July, before Vergil Ortiz had the fight against Surrey Boachuk. So defends that title, right? He defends that title, right? Then after that, he has another defense of that IBF championship. And in that defense of the IBF championship, of course, that was against Karen Chikadzian. So David mentioned Karen Chikadzian, and that Karen Chikadzian fight was on November 9th, right? I would say about a couple of weeks after that, there was news that was coming out that Vergil Ortiz Jr. was going to be having another fight, and it was going to be next year, and they were like aiming to see if they could have it around February. Then they said, "Oh, maybe we could get something with Boots around that time." So this what my thing was. So you mean to tell me that you're going to try to get something organized with Jerome Boots Ennis in February, which would have been a few months after he had his last bout against Karen Chikazian? That kind of like raised a red flag right there. So that's number one. So once that basically passed, and you did have Vergil Ortiz end up having this fight against Israel Madrimov on February 22nd. That's one. Okay. Two, after Vergil Ortiz had the fight against Israel Madrimov in Saudi Arabia, you had Oscar De La Hoya basically saying that, oh, we're going to take a break as far as like, tough bouts, because he, has an issue with his hand. So he was going to get work done on his hand. He injured his hand, so he was going to get work done on his hand. And that he was fighting like tough fights back to back, like saying Boachuk and Israel Madrimov back to back. Wanted to see if he could just, take a little bit step back there within the 154-pound division. So that was happening there on Vergil Ortiz's part, while on the other side, Boots Ennis, he was able to get the fight against Ian Montesanonis for the IBF and WBA welterweight titles. All right? So he got that, right? Then, after Boots gets that win, has that thing where he says he's going to be going up to 154. Nothing really from, Vergil Ortiz's camp. Nothing like that, right? Then all of a sudden, when you had this thing here, as far as like seeing who Vergil Ortiz was going to actually fight, it was nothing really going to be with Boots Ennis then, because again, they said he was injured. So why is it that you had Oscar De La Hoya or Vergil Ortiz Sr. or Robert Garcia talking about all that stuff, when at the same time they were complaining, particularly Robert Garcia was complaining about, with the status of Vergil Ortiz Jr. being the WBC interim champion, how come he wasn't named the mandatory to Sebastian Fundora? And that he was calling out the WBC president Mauricio Solomon about it, and then Mauricio Solomon made the post of a response saying that, hold up, y'all knew that wasn't going to happen because y'all said that Vergil Ortiz Jr. was injured. So we weren't going to name him as a mandatory if the fight wasn't going to be able to take place anyway. So that's on one front. So it seems like there's a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to the side of Vergil Ortiz. That's the thing that I got on that front. You know what I mean? So, hopefully that was kind of like a breakdown on that front. You know what I mean? Now, as far as like what happened after the fight, and this goes to my guy Smitty, man. He feels like, hey, the Boots fight should happen next, but it's not. Okay, and he's sure of it. You know what I mean? He said it'd be tough if Vergil Ortiz and Boots fought for the vacant 54 ring belt. Yeah, I mean, even to my opinion, Vergil Ortiz being the number one ranked fighter in the ring rankings at 154, being the interim champion for the WBC, when you have the actual world champion there in Sebastian Fundora that has 2 wins over Tim Tszyu there, right? And had the win in between that that was in late March, right? And was like unified champion before the WBO stripped him. I don't see how you can't have Sebastian Fundora at number 1, but hey, that's the ring. That's the ring for me. And I said nobody's telling the truth. Smitty says nobody's telling the truth because it's not happening next, right? And it was one thing that kind of like said, well, 2 things that kind of like bothered me, right? One was a whole little back and forth between the two, because they ain't really like shake on it and anything like that. It's like, oh, you want to be next? He's like, yeah, and all that, and they do a face off and stuff, right? But it really didn't feel like they were locked in to having a fight next. That was one. And then the other thing that kind of like bothered me was I caught part of a conversation that was on, I think it was Fight Hub or something like that, where they had Oscar De La Hoya after the press conference, the post-fight press conference. And he's like, oh my God, Vergil Ortiz, oh, he's the man. You saw what he did. He's the man. Look what he did to Erickson Lubin. He got all the keys. Look, he could fight Boots. He could fight Errol Spence. He could fight Sebastian Fundora. Oh my God. So with Oscar La Hoya saying that, he's more of like, yeah, because he feels like Vergil Ortiz Jr. has options, given that he's the WBC interim champion. One, given that he's around Texas. Two, that he could, hey, say, hey, I got this, I got this. I really don't necessarily need to have a fight with Boots Ennis. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, it's almost like he wants to have what I would say a negotiation chip over Boots Ennis and Eddie Hearn in matchroom boxing. And I think because of that, I'm highly doubtful that the fight happens next. Shout out to Joy in the building. Says that Lubin looks sluggish. Easy work for Vergil Ortiz Jr. Yep, he was sluggish, man. You know, I was saying there within the first part of the fight, when you don't have much as for emphasis behind your jabs, and this is like within round one. Yeah, I could get it when you want to, try to throw off the timing or throw off the level of comfortability of your opponent by pulling out your jabs, but going to the ropes very early in the fight, that tells me that your endurance level isn't as good as it should be in a fight of that caliber. And that's what I kind of like seeing there with Erickson Lubin. All right. And he has his on his wish list. Vergil Ortiz Jr. versus Sebastian Fundora. Yep, you got the WBC, as I said, the full champion there, Sebastian Fundora. And you got Vergil Ortiz Jr. as the interim champion. Yes, we should have had Sebastian Fundora versus Keith Thurman on October 25th, but we didn't. Fundora had a hand injury. They're looking like they're trying to see if we have a reschedule of that bout. But what about having WBC now put in that order? Y'all go ahead and say, hey, yeah, I wanna have Vergil Ortiz Jr. as a mandatory challenger for Sebastian Fundora's WBC Super Welterweight title. Let's see if they do that, because hey, I don't know, man. I don't know, man. My guy Thomas Hill in the building. So salute to you, brother Thomas Hill, for joining in here. Hit the like button, hit the share button for those that are currently listening right now to the Boxing Source Up. Man, it looks like, man, I'm having some issues here with getting people to join. I don't know what's going on. I think it might be something on my part. I don't understand why. But I have to see if there's like a way to do it. But I ain't even gonna touch it on that front. You know what I'm saying? I ain't even gonna touch it on that front. So I have to hit up maybe I gotta hit up the the streaming apparatus to see what's going on, because that's not a good look. I had everything set and everything and all that. Didn't change nothing. And now all of a sudden I can't get people to join in on the conversation for this particular thing here. That makes no sense. So I'm gonna have to see how it gets fixed there on that front. Hey, Thomas Hill. Hold on. Before that, he said Dancing with the Stars, he'll want that fight. He said he wants a way to dodge the fight there, brother Thomas Hill. And he asked a question here. He says, why did he lay on the ropes like that and not throw punches? Yeah, man. Like I said, I don't think, through camp that Erickson Lubin really kind of like worked on endurance and that type of thing, man. I think he was really like out of it, because you go to the ropes that early in the fight, that means, yeah, you weren't really planning on moving around the ring that much against your opponent. You know what I mean? 3 minutes and 35 seconds into the fight. Endurance shouldn't have been a problem. It shouldn't have been, but for what that happened there within those 3 minutes and 35 seconds, it looked like there was something going on with endurance there on that front, man. You know what I mean? So, with that being said, right, as I was mentioning there with this whole thing about Vergil Ortiz and Jerome Boots Ennis, you have the thing with Vergil Ortiz and Oscar De La Hoya saying that he has options and things like that. And that is not good when it comes to Boots Ennis. Yeah, I'm gonna tell you why. Earlier this week, we had reports that were going out that the WBA champion, the full champion, Abbas Barao, is going to be lined up to face the WBO champion and Xander Zayas in January. So a lot of people felt like, oh, with Boots Ennis having this fight against Luis Lima for the WBA interim championship, that will put him right there, ready to have the fight next with the WBA champion there in Abbas Barao. But nope, that didn't necessarily happen. So with that being said, now what's going to be the options for Boots Ennis if he can't secure the fight with Vergil Ortiz Jr.? Yeah, we did see a couple of fighters also that were there in attendance. One that's been inactive for, well, actually both of those guys have been inactive for a long time. And y'all know who it was. Errol Spence Jr. Of course, he's pretty much from the area, so he's going to be there. And Jamel Charlo. Jamel Charlo, of course, had been, talking about getting back in the ring and had, made a post on Instagram and saying, oh, his line is back and he's ready to, get back in a lot of these fighters, whether it's Bud Crawford or Sebastian Fedora, had like some with the lion, bite on the giraffe and, had a lion with a boot in his mouth and all that type of stuff. So about he wants all of those guys. It's one thing to say all that. It's another thing to actually get in the ring. And we got to actually see Jamel Charlo in the ring. Will it be against Boots Ennis? Not next. I don't see that happening. You know what I mean? But with that being said, man, I don't know. Like I'm being real with y'all. If you're gonna have Oscar De La Hoya and what was it? What's the manager's name there for Vergil Ortiz? I forgot. But you got his father there, Vergil Ortiz Sr. You got his trainer there, Robert Garcia, saying something. And all of those guys have a lot to say in reference to Vergil Ortiz Jr., but not. It doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like they are not in one accord as far as like who they would want to have be next for Vergil Ortiz Jr. It's like that. I mean, I don't like, and that's something on their part because if it's Vergil Ortiz Jr., I would be like, look, I don't care what y'all say. I want to fight Boots Ennis next. Nobody else, not no Sebastian Fedora, not no Errol Spence Jr., not anybody else has had his fight with Boots Ennis. But the way that team moving, I'm not too sure about all that. I'm really not too sure. So with that, I mean, I'm like, a lot of people may seem hopeful, but I'm more of a realistic type of a person, man. And I'm like, nah, we're not going to see this fight that a lot of people have been anticipating since both of those fighters have been at 154 pounds. We haven't, we didn't get any closer to it at 147 pounds. I mean, and I don't think we're going to get that much closer to it now. You want to talk about, oh, yeah, they don't have worlds, they ain't world champions, but they have interim champions, interim championship belts, excuse me. You have Boots as the WBA interim champion. You have Vergil Ortiz as the WBC interim champion. So they could have a fight. It would be no different than what we had earlier this year with David Benavidez and David Morrell. But I'm really not too sure about that. Yeah, there it is. Rick Marijan, that's the manager right there. Rick Marijan, talk about 8-figure minimum. Oh my God. Oh man. 8-figure minimum. Hold up. Come on, man. Come on, dog. 8-figure minimum. 8-figure. Come on, yo. What are we doing? What are we doing? See, this right here. This right here is why a number of fight fans get turned off with the sport. because you have either fighters, promoters, or managers asking for way too much money for fights. Way too much. Talking about eight-figure. Hold on. How could I put this right? So you mean to tell me that this guy Rick Meridian says that a fight between Jerome Boots Ennis and Vergil Ortiz Jr. would have a total purse of maybe around $20 million. Didn't like Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury in their first fight have around that same purse? That's for their first fight. I'm not even talking about the rematch and the third fight. I'm talking about the first bout. So you mean to tell me that you want to have a Vergil Ortiz Jr. that, as some people was mentioning there leading into this fight against Erickson Lubin, didn't really have a crowd that even had people on the upper level of the Dickies Arena there. And yet, regardless of where the fight is going to be, I don't care if it's Vegas, I don't care if it's LA, I don't care if it's New York, I don't care if it's in Saudi Arabia or whatever. Y'all talk about eight-figure minimum? Come on, dog. What are we doing? And see, this is why a lot of fights that are supposed to be highly anticipated, highly, like talked about and everything like that get nixed because either fighters, managers, promoters are asking for too much money. All right? You know what I'm saying? It's hey man, hey, I'm trying to do that as possible, man. You know what? As they say, you might have some favorites or whatever it is, or people could accuse you of having favorites, but I try to, like I said, I give it to you straight as much as I can. You know what I'm saying? As a matter of fact, man, that question that was asked earlier on this show, man, I had something where it was loaded up, right? Where you had the back and forth between Mauricio Suleiman and Robert Garcia. And I think Rick Meridian was on, pretty much like on that front, right? So when you have a lot of people, chiming in and that type of stuff, I'm like, that should tell you what's going on. You know what I mean? So I'm not all too sure about all that, man. I'm really not too sure about that. And hopefully, man, I hope Suleiman didn't delete this the response that he had, because that was the thing that kind of like said, hey, how are you going to have Vergil Ortiz Jr. as the interim champion and then say that he's supposed to I guess challenge Sebastian Fedora and say that, oh, why did y'all name him as a mandatory when they knew that bro was injured? So you can't even bring that up. You feel me? Yeah, something tells me that he did delete it. I'm looking at Rachel Suleiman's Twitter or X account, and I don't even see it, man. Oh man, he should have deleted it, man. Come on, stand on what you said, man. He should have stood on that, man. Oh my god. All right. So yeah, let's see what it is, man. He said, "Oh, shout out to Joey." He says he'd like to see Keith Thurman fight soon with one of the guys. Hey, I mean, he said he was ready to go October 25th, and then the whole thing happened there with Sebastian Fedora, and now I don't know, man. We go see what happens here, but I would say within a couple of months. I think within a couple months' time, we'll see if Vergil Ortiz Jr. and his, party makes that move to say, oh, we're going to be calling for the mandatory to get that fight with Sebastian Fedora. Because I doubt that he's going to have that fight. Like, come on, Errol Spence, what are we doing? Come on, man. He's just, coming back from, like a cruise and having vacations, and he got, the ranch, and he got businesses here and there. Sometimes, they say, you know what? I got all this going on. I really don't have to come back in the ring. I really don't. And you had, what was it, Sean Porter talking about it in one of his recent podcasts about Errol Spence Jr. And I'm like, come on. If you got it and you good, you set with your businesses, you set with your money, your finances are all good, you really don't have to worry about, coming back all too much. You feel me? And in a sense, with it being Errol Spence Jr., like it would be causing a good little grip to have him come back to the ring. Just being honest with you. You know what I mean? So with Keith Thurman, yeah, I would have to see if Keith Thurman will have something else lined up because remember, at the beginning of this year, he was supposed to be fighting Tim Zoo. That's why he got back and fought in Australia. What was that, like back in March, right? So that they would be able to set up that fight. And then all of a sudden, Tim Zoo goes out and faces Sebastian Fedora. And then now he was supposed to have that opportunity with Sebastian Fedora, and that's all but lost. You know what I mean? But that's mainly what I had as far as like that whole back and forth with Vergil Ortiz and Boots. Said it's like I'll probably talk about a little bit more later on down the line or in other shows, but like seeing that back and forth and Boots like really saying like, "Yo, why were y'all talking like y'all was talking? Y'all got a lot." I said they got a lot of people within that camp that's been saying different things and then try to push out PR saying that Boots did this and I'm like, you sure about all that? I don't know. Damn. Um, just real quick rundown of the card that they had. Shout out to Joshua Edwards. They're getting a TKO win over Zito Boris. So they're the heavyweight, American heavyweight. From the Houston area, of course, is in the camp there with Coach Ronnie Shields, right? And as mentioned before by one of our live guests here, mentioning Amari Jones, who got that TKO victory over Shady Gamore. And he says, hey, maybe you want to see him against Jahad Tucker. First, I got to see where Jahad Tucker's going to be as far as like his weight, because, I don't know if he's going to be there middleweight, super middleweight, probably there at middleweight. But, that would be a really good matchup there, for both of those fighters. You know what I mean? And then, also you had there in the co-feature bout, Darius Fulgham versus David Stevens. And that fight ended in a majority draw. 96-94 was one score in favor of Darius Fulgham, and then two scores of 95-95. Now, of course, both of those fighters had the loss to Beck the Bully, and Fulgham, had that loss there in May of this year. And one of the better bouts that we've had this year. Now, if Darius Fulgham didn't get knocked down in round 12, that would have probably been the thing there for him to get the win against Beck Malakuzia, but it ended up happening. So now there against David Stevens, that was almost like a crossroads fight, as they always say. They're at super middleweight, and hey, like I said, back and forth, real close. Ended up being a majority draw. So I don't know what they're going to do as far as like matchmaking for both of those fighters, because I would think with them being around that crossroads, they only have like about 15, 17 or so professional fights. Now we got to see what their direction is going to be. You know what I mean? Stevens, had the key win there against Kumakov in June of this year, getting a win over an undefeated fighter after losing to Beck, right? So this one here is like, okay, where would these guys be at as far as like that bottom part of the, I would say, top 30 or so within super middleweight, or maybe like 30, 35, but did get a definitive result on that front, right? All right. So, that's mainly the rundown there for, that particular card. Wanted to touch on this thing here with the ProBox card, with the headlining bout there, Nicholas Flores versus Delonte Tiger Johnson. At the time there, it was for the NABO Welterweight Championship, right? That is, a version of a WBO type of belt, you know what I mean, to kind of like get you up there within the rankings of the WBO. Now, you had Nicholas Flores, who, kind of like was there floating around in the pro box circuit or whatever it was. Has had, a few good wins there and whatnot. And he, at the time, was, ranked number 11 in the WBO. He also was ranked like number 11 in the IBF as well. So you kind of like see him slowly go up the rankings here in the welterweight division. Then you had Tiger Johnson, who's there undefeated, 16-0. I think what was his last bout was over in Norfolk, Virginia, against Janelson Bocachica, getting a unanimous decision win. Yeah, I was there. It was almost like a clean sweep. Bocachica was like making it really, what I would say, really rough in there. I didn't see him like have that much of an effort against Tiger Johnson, right? But hey, Tiger Johnson stayed composed, did what he had to do there in that particular instance, and got the win. Now here, going up against Nicholas Flores. Like I said, with Nicholas Flores, to me, man, he had been fairly impressive in a ProBox circuit. I had seen him live in 2024 when he faced Lucas Santa Maria, getting a stoppage win there, and then he just kept, building himself up there in the welterweight division, right? But Tiger Johnson, I guess, said like, hey, there's levels to this, and he showed that, hey, those levels were really not up to par when it came to Nicholas Flores. And Tiger Johnson like caught him with a good punch and ducked under to put Nicholas Flores to the canvas, and then eventually ended up getting that stoppage victory. So you got Tiger Johnson there, still undefeated. Now has the NABO welterweight championship, right? It is 17-0 now with 8 wins by way of knockout. And this kind of puts him up there in the welterweight division. I wanted to go back to what was it? The comment that was brought up here by Mar the Prince. He says Tiger Johnson versus Rohan Polanco would be fire. Ooh, let me see. Rohan Polanco undefeated. Dominican Republic. Has had a good number of nice performances. There while being under top rank. They had him like fairly active. Over the past, I would say 12 months or so. They'll have the latest win over Quentin Randall at the theater at Madison Square Garden. So I would say that would be a really good matchup. I don't know if Top Rank would put Tiger Johnson and Rohan Polanco against each other like that quickly, but I would say that if they do, it would be a really good matchup to see who could potentially be next out there in the welterweight division to contend for a world title when it comes to Delonte Tiger Johnson and Rohan Polanco. But shout out to Tiger Johnson, him getting this win over Nicholas Flores. And I kind of picked him to win. It's just that I didn't pick it to be like a stoppage win. I picked it to be Tiger Johnson to win by decision, but he was able to handle this, fairly well. Get that stoppage, have Nicholas Flores not really, respond after round 4. So that's his win on that front. You did also have Dominic Valle getting a decision win over Rene Alvarado. Of course, Alvarado is like a very experienced fighter there in the lightweight division. So Valle, another one of those guys at ProBox, get that win. Javier Bocanegra and Rodolfo Bocanegra both getting stoppage wins. You had in the co-feature, Katsuma Akatsugi getting a stoppage win over Vincent Australabio also on that front. So a lot of good action there through ProBox on Friday. So you had all of that stuff that went down on Friday and Saturday. You got more stuff that's coming up here. Of course, we had the whole thing with the event that was supposed to happen in Miami, Florida, get canceled. So we got to get more information on that. I did have an interview with the underdog Avius Griffin, a couple weeks ago. Shout out to Avius Griffin, his birthday today. So shout out to him. But they say, they're working on seeing what is going to happen with Jake Paul, if they're gonna have a new date set up, potentially in December. And once they get that sorted, they'll have that fight kind of like rescheduled there when it comes to Avius Griffin. When he had his bout that he was preparing for, right? But you had that was supposed to happen on Friday. Saturday, you got the rematch there over in the UK. Chris Eubank Jr. versus Carter Bill. That particular fight card. So they're starting up there with fight week on that. Uh, what else is there that was on the docket that maybe I wanted to talk about? Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, I got to talk about this. Okay, so we had recent news there when it came to, as they say, the quote, Clarissa Shields, right? Getting the uh getting a new deal that is a multi-fight deal that's worth around $8 million. Okay, so that's like a groundbreaking deal there for women's boxing, groundbreaking deal for Clarissa Shields. And the thing that actually got me was her having re-signing with Salida Promotions. So so with that being said, right, gets that new deal. Now what could be next for Clarissa Shields? Where's she gonna like continue her career at? Who are gonna be potential opponents for her down the line? You know, because for me, it's more about who will be out there for her as opponents. Of course, you know she's been a multi-division champion. Her last fight against Lady Daniels, when she was like undisputed champion there in the heavyweight division, undisputed at what middleweight and super middleweight. So the thing is, or what is it? Actually, was it super middleweight or super welterweight? I think it was super welterweight. But now it's like, okay, who else could be out there for her as the challenge, like to be with challenges for? Like I had possibilities. One is a rematch between her and Franchon Cruz. Another one could be Shadeja Green. Um, some people mentioned maybe Michaela Mayer at 154. I'm like, I don't know if it's gonna be that. Plus, I think they they're kind of like friends or buddies or whatever it is. So I'm not sure if that's going to happen. But I would say that, and maybe just maybe they could rehash a potential matchup between Clarissa Shields there and Chris Cyborg, potentially. But outside of that, I really don't. I'm really not all too sure. Maybe we get more information as we go further here within 2025 going into 2026. But outside of that, what one thing is, shout out for Clarissa Shields and getting that groundbreaking deal, and we'll see what's next. You know what I mean? But on that front, I pretty much like covered a lot there as far as like what's going on in the boxing scene. I do have to figure out what's going on with this whole streaming apparatus and not being able to add guests on, because this has actually happened over 2 weeks or so, and it's not working properly. So I'll get with Rumble. Yeah, Rumble, I'm getting at you for this. We gotta get this thing fixed. All right, we gotta get this thing fixed. All right, so that's mainly what I have here as far as like what's going on so far. Getting everything done within like about an hour. Actually, tomorrow on YouTube, I will see if I have the Unified World Champion, the Sweet Terminator Shadeja Green, on YouTube live tomorrow afternoon. So y'all be on the lookout for that. Okay. So that's what I got on slate here so far. We're gonna have more, leading into the week. We'll have see about sorting out more interviews and things like that. Like we've had, a lot of guests here, within the midweek report or outside of that, over the past couple of weeks. Shout out to, of course, Coach Bob Santos, who I had a long live conversation with a couple of days ago. I'm gonna see if I can get that video on Rumble, the Rumble account, and then also get some of the interviews that I had from being at Hillcrest Gym a few days ago, also on Rumble. So if you haven't checked it out on YouTube already, I'll see if I could have it uploaded to Rumble Shout out once again to everyone that's been able to watch live. Hit the like button, hit the share button. It will be available in audio form pretty soon. And that's what I got for y'all. All right, I'll catch y'all later. Peace out.